Hello everyone, in today's topic we're going to explore how the vast majority of the UFO has been actually human-made by the government to control our narrative and probably in the near future to prepare us for a very big event. The UFO phenomena may seem like an unlikely place to go hunting for the nature of the beast. However, having written roughshod over the subject of religion in part 1, I am now about to challenge the alien agenda here in part 2 by presenting an alternative, if highly unfashionable, point of view. The vast majority of the information I'm about to present comes from a book that still shines as a beacon of reason, common sense, and logic amidst the chaos that is the history of UFOs and related phenomena, Operation Trojan Horse by John Keel from 1970. The research of John Keel and also Jacques Vallée during the 1960s through the early 90s was groundbreaking, but sadly doomed. This is best illustrated in the reaction of Steven Spielberg when, in relation to the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Vallée tried to convince him that the subject was even more interesting if it wasn't extraterrestrial, if it was real, physical, but not E.T. So Spielberg said, "You're probably right, but that's not what the public is expecting. This is Hollywood, and I want to give people something that's close to what they expect." I wonder who exactly he meant by they. Hopefully, by the end of this post, you'll be as convinced as I am of its relevance. John Keel is the author who was responsible for the Mothman prophecies. Actually, I personally enjoy the documentary that came with the DVD version much more than the film. There really isn't space here to go regurgitating thousands of UFO sightings or contactee accounts from the Operation Trojan Horse book, so I'll try to concentrate on the implications of his research with regard to the topic being presented. John Keel. John Keel's investigations into the UFO phenomena took place at an interesting time. During the 1950s and 60s, the subject was still relatively young, and therefore so was the associated brainwashing. Keel came to the subject as a skeptic from a paranormal perspective rather than a scientific one. He made a study of all the strange phenomena he could find going back to ancient Greek and Roman times, whenever they were. He came to realize that the phenomena being promoted as aliens from another planet in nuts and bolts spacecraft had all the hallmarks of classic paranormal activity. Through studying the paranormal aspects of UFO sightings and supposed alien contact, which no one else seemed to be doing at that time, he was able to discern specific patterns or a modus operandi within the phenomena. His conclusions are startling and highly relevant to this topic. The Astral Exponents. He wasn't actually the only one who came to the same conclusions. RAF Air Marshal Sir Victor Goddard, a very high-ranking member of the British government, gave a public lecture at Caxton Hall in London on May 3, 1969. The astral world of illusion, which on physical evidence is greatly inhibited by illusion-prone spirits, is well known for its multifarious imaginative activities and exhortations. Seemingly, some of its denizens are eager to exemplify principalities and powers. Others pronounce upon morality, spirituality, deity, etc. All of these astral exponents who invoke human consciousness may be sincere, but many of their these may be framed to propagate some special phantasm, perhaps of an earlier incarnation, or to indulge an inveterate and continuing technological urge toward materialistic progress, or simply to astonish and disturb the gullible for the devil of it. The antics of these astral exponents have been carefully recorded throughout history. Also, in 1969, the U.S. Government Printing Office issued a publication compiled by the Library of Congress for the Air Force Office of Scientific Research. UFOs and related subjects, and annotated by bibliography. After reading thousands of UFO articles, books, and magazines, the senior bibliographer, Miss Lynn E. Cato, has stated, "A large part of the available UFO literature is closely linked with mysticism and the metaphysical. It deals with subjects like mental telepathy, automatic writing, and invisible entities, as well as phenomena like poltergeist manifestations and possession. Many of the UFO reports now being published in the popular press recount alleged incidents that are strikingly similar to demoniac possession and physic phenomena, which has long been known to theologians and parapsychologists." Denizens of the Invisible Realm. John Keel believed that any serious, unbiased consideration of real UFOs must take into account the whole range of phenomena that it entails. He claimed that this should involve ghosts, phantoms, and all of the strange mental aberrations that seem to emanate from an invisible world that surrounds us and occasionally engulfs us, as well as the popular alien flying saucer element. The phenomena also includes prophets and prophecies and gods and demons, as well as men in silver suits and helmets. I would also include crop circles. He believed that this unseen world interacts with us by means of illusion and hallucination. It can make the unreal seem very real. It can distort reality itself and has the means to manipulate space, time, and physical matter using forces that are almost entirely beyond our powers of comprehension. He also concluded that the denizens of this invisible realm have had a profound and highly significant influence on our history since its earliest documentation, which indicates that they have always been an intrinsic part of our physical realm, that they seem to know everything about us, can speak our languages, and are even completely familiar with the lives of all the humans they come into contact with. Fortean Phenomena. Keel was a keen follower of the indefatigable Charles Fort, who unwittingly became the first ufologist. We learn from his Book of the Damned that in 1846, according to the newspaper accounts of the day, it rained real blood in several areas around the world, and all kinds of odd lights and shapes were seen in the sky. The range and frequency of stuff that falls from the sky is quite astonishing, really. And we're not just talking the odd one or two. These range from showers to deluges and should be borne in mind by anyone who has an interest in the mudflood phenomena. There have been accounts of alabaster, ants, ashes, beef, beetle larvae, berries, bitumen, blood, butter, charcoal, china fragments, cinder, coal, cow bees, coins, crabs, crayfish, elves, fish, flesh, gelatinous matter, grain, hay, ice, iron balls, jellyfish, limestone, lizards, mud, mussels, oyster shells, periwinkles, quartz, resin, salt, sand, sandalwood, seeds, silk, snails, snakes, spawns, spiders, carved and shaped stones, turtles, and of course toads and frogs. But then there's ice. Bloody huge chunks of itself smashing down on houses and cars. They seem to fall from cloudless skies. Mimicry. As we move closer to our own time, it's very interesting to see how the aerial phenomenon mimics our own latest technology, and yet in a way that seems not to be hampered by the same laws of physics that we have to contend with. Up until the 19th century, apart from lights, orbs, and cigars, etc., the most common specific phenomena were cloud ships. There are many such accounts, some that include interaction with the occupants and even captured anchors. The Great Airship Mystery of 1896. In 1896, the phenomena changed with the arrival of the Great Airship Mystery. Not that airships were something new in those times, they were, however, quite primitive, rather fragile, and limited in terms of speed, payload, and reliability, many people have suggested that the Great Airship Mystery was some kind of a mass delusion inspired by Jules Verne's novel Robert the Conqueror, which featured an airship. However, the novel was published in 1886, 10 years prior to the epidemic of mysterious sightings. The UFO flap began during Thanksgiving week in November 1896 and went right through to May 1897, with a lull between December and March. It involved a total of 14 American states. It started with what Keel termed the press agent game. Typically, a small, dark-skinned, dark-eyed aristocratic gentleman would appear in an area immediately before or immediately after a UFO flap. These cases are not widely known and have been poorly investigated because the hardcore UFO cultists have found it impossible to reconcile such seemingly normal beings with extraterrestrial visitants. These mystery men usually traveled in threes, and back in the 60s they were known as the Three Men in Black. Bear in mind that this was before Hollywood had taken the theme and totally twisted it around. They usually wore somber clothing, had olive complexions, and in most cases high cheekbones and oriental eyes. These mystery men, or press agents, carefully chose the best fall guys who would, on their behalf, disseminate seemingly plausible reasons for the phenomena that they obviously knew would be about to take place or that had already taken place. The Mystery Inventor. Right on cue in November 1896, one of these men in black, accompanied by three mechanics, approached two of the most highly respected attorneys in San Francisco. The first was attorney George D. Collins, and the other William Henry Harrison Hart, who had once run for the office of State Attorney General. The stranger, who has never identified in any of the subsequent and numerous press reports, claimed to be the inventor of a magnificent new airship and was seeking legal representation and help to obtain patents. The flap of Thanksgiving week began just after the stranger's visit to the first of the attorneys. Both of the press liaison recruits played their roles to perfection, but the reporters were never able to identify or locate the mysterious inventor. However, he would appear again and again in the numerous descriptions of encounters with the airship occupants that were published 5 months after he first appeared during the subsequent wave of April 1897. Airship Armada. There were many signed and sworn affidavits attesting to the 1896 and subsequent spring 1897 sightings, and many witnesses were distinguished members of their communities. Mayors, ex-senators, attorneys. Their accounts displayed remarkable consistencies, and there were many detailed contactee stories. However, none of the literally thousands of airship sightings matched the description given by the original Man in Black inventor, and the frequency and distribution of the sightings made it impossible for there to be just one airship. Some of the contactee encounters took place simultaneously hundreds of miles apart. Many of the airship sightings took place on the same day in dozens of widely scattered areas, indicating that a whole armada of these objects must have been in the air at that time. Sightings weren't just limited to airships. Strange luminous objects and cigar-shaped craft were also reported. Crews on ships were seeing glowing spheres and saucer-shaped machines rising out of the water and flying away, while the Wright brothers were still fussing with gliders. These ocean-bound discs and wheels apparently concentrated their activities around the coast of Japan and China throughout the gay 90s, but they were also seen in Europe. News traveled slowly in those days, so it is unlikely that the witnesses in one area had ever heard of the identical sightings that had occurred thousands of miles away. The Explainers and Hoaxsters. During the initial period, and following an increase in sightings and the addition of cattle mutilations into the mix, there began what John Keel identified as another familiar face, namely the Explainers and Hoaxsters, as he called them. In this one, it was common to see false newspapers reports, often created by frustrated journalists who hadn't been fortunate enough to get a genuine story, and sometimes simply by people who wanted their 15 minutes of fame. Similarly, there were scientific attempts to explain, or rather debunk, the phenomena as some mundane occurrence. More worryingly was the frequent involvement of someone who seemed to come out of the woodwork with an almost pathological determination to utterly discredit the phenomena. These people presented themselves as fanatics whose one purpose in life was to combat what was to them the heresy of the phenomena. Once everything had died down, they always disappeared and were never heard of again. Viva la Revolution. John Keel was also able to identify another familiar pattern found in all contactee stories: the visitor's total awareness of contemporary events. From the very first Man in Black encounter, the mysterious inventor had mentioned the situation in Cuba that was current at the time and which would later lead to the Spanish-American War. See the article top right in the image above. This theme was repeated during subsequent encounters with remarkably similar-looking pilots of airships who all seemed to be concerned with the situation and willing to take action against the Spanish. One also mentioned going to the aid of the Armenians who were then being slaughtered by the Turks. Expert witnesses. The many conversations with the airship occupants usually involved first-rate witnesses, like ex-senators, and whilst the technical details of the airships differed, the important points that the airship was a secret terrestrial invention that would soon be made public were always consistent. Other contactees in other areas were repeating the same thing. The blinding UFO light. Other common factors to the sightings are reports of powerful beacons or searchlights that the flying objects used to spray blinding light over the ground they passed. This is still another thing that turns up repeatedly in modern UFO reports and has become a de facto standard in Hollywood UFO TV series and movies. The nonsense factor. There were even artifacts discovered that were supposedly dropped from the airships, complete with various messages from the occupants, many of which again repeated the terrestrial nature of the airship's construction and the intention to reveal it to the world soon alongside what can only be described as nonsense. This nonsense factor points to yet another familiar theme. Some of the contactees would be told ridiculous things that would discredit not only them but the whole mystery. Knowing how we think and how we search for consistencies, the ultra-terrestrials were careful to sow inconsistencies in their wake, and they staged some outrageous stunts, such as singing loudly as they flew over Farmersville, Texas on April 19, or playing a phonograph or other instruments over Fontanelle, Iowa on April 12. When the startled townspeople reported hearing an orchestra playing in the sky, newspapers whooped and heaped ridiculously on the story. Phantom German airships over the UK in 1909. The following account has rather more sinister undertones. In the spring of 1909, Germany's prototype airships were incapable of night reconnaissance operations over the British coast, and yet during 4 months that spring, several hundred eyewitnesses claimed to have seen phantom zeppelins moving across the night sky, performing maneuvers which were impossible for any contemporary airship or airplane of the day. In addition, a number of people claimed to have seen this mysterious airship at close range, hearing its wiring engines and observing its cigar-shaped gas bag and dazzling searchlight. Once again, just as in America, there were hundreds of eyewitnesses from across the length and breadth of the British Isles and Ireland. Charles Fort noted that lights in the sky had been frequently reported simultaneously from places that were far apart. They ranged from Ipswich on the East Anglian coast to Belfast in Ireland, a distance of 350 miles, and from Hull to Swansea, a further 200 miles. Other reports have been uncovered from the Isle of Man, the West Country, and Tyneside, and there is every possibility others could be found in the Irish and Scottish newspapers from the same period. The media factor. This time, there was no press agent or mysterious inventor to act as a catalyst for the flap. However, just before the airship scare in 1908, London newspapers had serialized H.G. Wells' novel, The War in the Air, which depicted airships laying waste to New York with bombs dropped from the sky. The media were busy fostering mass panic by highlighting the emergence of aerial invasion and questioning the effectiveness of the Navy to defend the island nation. There were also rumors of secret aerial reconnaissance. All of this propaganda was aimed at convincing people that Germany was the enemy who would invade sooner or later. Phantom Germans. With all of this paranoia, it wasn't really necessary for any men in black to get involved, as the media had done their job for them. The truly astonishing thing is that rather than reports of mostly friendly, eccentric test pilots and their crew that were seen in America, the UK sightings all featured German-looking characters, and apparently German artifacts were also dropped from the airships. It is clear that no German Zeppelin airship crossed or was capable of crossing the North Sea to perform reconnaissance of the English coast in the spring of 1909. The prototype craft which did exist were untested and fatally vulnerable to adverse weather conditions, problems which were never entirely solved. Even if such a mission had been possible, the potential for an international incident in the event of a malfunction or crash was an inconceivable risk. Enter the Men in Black. It didn't take long for Men in Black types to appear, though. In May 1909, a curious object had been found partly embedded in the top of a cliff on the East Anglian coast. It was claimed to be from an airship and to have had a German manufacturer's name on it. The Navy got involved and declared it to be something else entirely, a buoy. They also changed the name from that of a German manufacturer to a Danish one, although they never explain how it might have ended up stuck in the ground at the top of a cliff. While this was taking place, two foreign-looking men were seen feverishly searching for something over several hours within the area where the object had originally been found. They then turned their attention to the house where the object had been stored and were seen hovering around for 5 hours outside. When a servant girl left the house, the two men approached her and spoke in a strange language. The terrified girl ran back into the house. The source is East Anglian Daily Times, 18 May 1909. Phantom Surveyors. On the other side of the country in South Wales, and at exactly the same time, 4 foreigners were seen surveying and photographing the area carefully. Their traps or carts were equipped with cameras mounted on supports above the seats. At noon, the 2 traps went off in different directions. This was the prelude to a series of sightings in the South Wales area that followed shortly afterwards. Got a light, mate? There was another encounter in London between 2 civilians and 2 foreigners who were flying a huge craft that bore little or no resemblance to a Zeppelin. One of the civilians exchanged some tobacco for a pipe with someone of German appearance. The German gentleman had a cap and a beard and a map in front of him. It was fastened on a board and there were red discs on it, as though they had been stuck in the map with pins. The other occupant was in charge of the searchlight, which was a prominent feature of all the sight lights. There were multiple sightings of similar airships from all over the country that night. In Flagrante Delicto, the most sensational of all the reports during 1909 came from South Wales, where the Surveyors had been seen previously. An eyewitness claimed he had seen a landed airship and its two pilots, evidently German officers, near the top of Carefully Mountain at 11 p.m. on the night of 18 May 1909. This is a very remote spot indeed. They wore big, heavy fur coats and tight-fitting fur caps. These pilots were too busy to notice the intruder at first, but when they saw him, they began leaping up and down, jabbering furiously at each other in a foreign tongue. After hurriedly collecting a few items from the ground, they climbed aboard the airship and took off. There were a number of sightings of an airship in the surrounding area at around the time the airship took off and made its way over Cardiff towards the Channel. Incriminating Evidence. Reporters from several Cardiff newspapers accompanied him, the witness, on a return visit to the scene of the craft's touchdown. Waiting for them was a 50-foot-long gauge in the hard ground, as if a plowshare or some such hard contrivance had been drawn across it. Trampled grass and a whole collection of torn paper and other objects were scattered around. Among these were newspaper cuttings containing references to airships and the German army, including one with a headline which read, "War in the Air. Government appoints a committee of experts. Bid for supremacy. Wright brothers have a conference with Mr. Haldane." Another cutting from the London Daily Telegraph contained references to the German Kaiser, underlining the connotation that the airship contained foreign spies. Strewn across the grass were small pieces of blue paper bearing a mass of figures and letters of the alphabet formed in a style distinctly different to that of the average English calligraphy, along with a quantity of pulpy papier-mâché paper and the lid of a tin of metal polish. Another piece of paper contained the letterhead from a firm in London stockbrokers, sliced in half, on which typewritten words read, "Provincial Centres, rest assured we shall not, the fullest confidence, this letter imply justified." Soon afterwards, a spokesman for the firm of stockbrokers, Arthur Shirley & Co., of Treadley Street, London, denied all knowledge of the airship mystery and could not explain how their notepaper had turned up in the lair of the scare ship. The head of the firm said he recognized the words found on the letter and added, "They are from a letter I have sent to several correspondents in Wales. I have several friends in Wales who have taken out airship patents, but I know nothing of this affair." Here again we see the phenomena's remarkable familiarity and concern with current events. This time, though, there was clearly a sinister element of incriminating evidence involved. Explainers and hoaxsters again. After the 21st May, reports began to dry up, and then came the explainers and hoaxsters phase. Newspapers carried reports that the airships were advertising campaigns, and even Bovril were accused. Dirigible balloons were apparently tied to a car and towed along. One such balloon was found abandoned across a hedge. Amazingly, this explanation was considered to be definitive by the majority of newspapers. By the end of May 1909, many editorials had taken a hostile stance against the scare and began to ridicule those who claimed to have seen the flying machine. The research for this article found evidence to suggest that while the London newspapers dropped the airship story after 25 May, several provincial papers continued to print stories. Absurdity and confusion again. Having gone to such remarkable efforts to scare the bejesus out of everyone with the H.G. Wells serialization and unfounded rumors of German invasion, the media did a complete 180. The 6th of July edition of the Daily News, a London paper, came up with a secret inventor story. A Dr. M.B. Boyd presented himself as the genius behind the airship phenomena and made all kinds of outrageous claims. However, he made the mistake of taking responsibility for the sightings over Northampton, which had been satisfactorily explained as being caused by a fire balloon at the time. Of course, nothing ever came of Dr. Boyd's airship, and even Wikipedia missed the chance to blame the entire hoax on him. Who exactly was playing the role of the Man in Black here? Dr. Boyd or the media? Nobody knows. The German reaction. The Imperial German government's own thoughts on the scare were eloquently expressed by Herr Friedrich Dernberg, father of the German colonial secretary. He wrote in a telegram printed by many national and provincial newspapers that while Germans may shrug their shoulders at the symptoms recently manifested of the state of the British mind towards Germany, namely the invasion scare and the stories of 40,000 spies disguised as waiters, vessels cruising at the mouth of the Humber, and of a mysterious airship hovering over England at night, these are most serious factors in the situation, for when an external incident exciting popular imagination occurs, even a peace-loving German government may be driven to the most fateful decisions. It's worth repeating. An external incident exciting popular imagination. And again in reverse, popular imagination exciting an external incident. Phantom German airships in New Zealand. Another such incident began in July 1909 when an identical airship scare gripped the British colony of New Zealand. This had again been preceded by media-created hysteria, with the New Zealand press giving reports of the UK events and also presenting Germany as the enemy poised to invade, even though New Zealand is on the other side of the world. Massachusetts airship flap of 1909. We're not finished with 1909 yet, as back in America there was another flap, this time in Massachusetts. Rather than the usual press agent and mysterious inventor, this time a genuine, identifiable, reputable engineer businessman from Worcester gave a press conference to announce his wonderful new airship. Most of the technical details and claims of performance were outrageous, as the machine was supposedly larger than anything that could have been successfully flown in 1909. But right on cue, just before Christmas, the sightings began. Strangely, though, the very first sighting was being reported to the press in New York at exactly the same time as the press conference in Worcester was taking place. After the press conference, the inventor withdrew and refused to make any more comments. Meanwhile, reports of sightings went through the roof during the day leading up to Christmas, and the press wanted answers. This time, apart from the usual lights in the sky, the main feature was an ultra-powerful beam of light that shone for miles as it scanned the countryside on its travels across the New England states, just the same as the UK sightings earlier in the year. The inventor would not make it clear whether he was responsible for the sightings or not, claiming it was his own business. He repeated his outrageous claims regarding the airship's capabilities and then said he would reveal it in his own time. Curiouser and curiouser. The story then takes an even stranger twist. An intrepid United Press reporter discovered a 100-foot-long workshop secluded in some dense woodland on the estate of John B. Gough, a famous temperance lecturer, which was 6 miles outside of Worcester. On site, he found 14 men from the Morgan Construction Company of Worcester at work there on some secret occupation. Paul Morgan, head of the construction company, was a close friend of Wallace E. Tillinghast, the self-proclaimed inventor of the airship, as they reported was advancing through the woods to reconnoiter. He was captured by some of the men employed on the estate, taken before a justice of the peace, and fined for trespass. Wallace Tillinghast does get a Wikipedia page and is cited as being responsible for an airplane hoax in the early 1900s. In fact, all of the incidents I am relating here are now presented as hoaxes because they don't support the modern alien space visitor agenda. More Men in Black? Anyway, back at the ranch, the sightings continued and Tillinghast came under even more pressure, but refused to speak. His house was besieged by reporters, and the Providence, Rhode Island Journal remarked, "At the door of his place of business and at his home, he is closely watched by a mysterious man." Apart from one solitary interview that revealed nothing new apart from the same outlandish claims, nothing further happened until on the 30th December, a spokesman, in the form of one William Hunt, stated that the machine would be publicly displayed at the Boston Aero Show planned for the week of February 1623, 1910. The sightings ceased. Tillinghast slipped back into oblivion. The marvelous airship was never revealed to the public, and whatever was in the 100-foot workshop may still be there. Not playing at a cinema near you. What distinguishes these episodes from the previous one is the obvious central involvement of humans to the plot. Tillinghast was both press agent and mysterious inventor, although not so mysterious. It would be very easy to dismiss this event as a complete hoax, as just about the entire internet has done, but no one gained by it. Tillinghast was still insistent on making his deluded claims even when his life had been turned completely upside down. The abundance of eyewitness accounts show that there was something up in the skies during those 10 days over Christmas 1909. It's equally as easy to speculate about what really happened to Tillinghast and Morgan. Were they abducted or entranced into believing that they had been taken aboard the airship and had its capabilities demonstrated to them? Were they promised riches beyond their wildest dreams if they fronted the airship project? What a movie it would make. But it would never happen. No aliens and spaceships. The intense modern fixation on aliens and their nuts and bolts technology successfully edits out all of the human and not so human involvement in so-called UFO phenomena. We are constantly assured that we are not alone and that aliens are among us, that we owe everything attributable to the lost ancient civilization and even our very existence to ancient aliens. What about all of these mysterious foreign-looking chaps and their associates? What of the press agents? What else have they been responsible for kicking off over the centuries? It's been so easy to hijack the Men in Black theme and present them as unacknowledged saviors of the world with their talking dog sidekicks, because we've all been conditioned by Mulder's poster so that we all want to believe. But it's all part of a huge distraction. Like Spielberg said, it's what they expect. The UFO factory production line or custom built? The proliferation of documented sightings since the earliest records is hard to ignore past of as mass hallucinations or hoaxes. It also demonstrates the immense adaptability of the phenomena by the way it always adopts acceptable forms depending upon the time period. These forms are never truly original, but always have a suitable frame of reference and seem to have been copied either from the drawing boards of technical innovators, fantasy artists, or from nature itself. There is no standard UFO. The permutations of size, shape, solidity, color, and behavior are phenomenal. The point is, though, if there were a standard UFO and it was being seen all over the world, then it would have to be taken very seriously. Comets and meteors are frequent visitors, and many of them even appear to be natural, but many of them don't. There have been flaps of green fireballs and other fiery objects that take evasive action before crashing into the ground. As mentioned previously, all manner of perfectly ordinary stuff simply falls from the sky. Small stones, rocks, and pebbles have materialized inside rooms giving rise to many well-documented investigations that fail to explain anything. Crop circles follow a very similar pattern to UFO flaps, especially in regard to the explainers and hoaxsters phase. The graphics of the circles themselves even create frames of reference, quantum physics, and even bloody gray aliens. The messages from the circles are always obtuse and of no real value. Behind the curtain. All of this phenomena is related and derives from the same source. It has the ability to manipulate matter, time, and physics of this realm to its whims and with great ease. This suggests that it must be of that which forms the physical, material plane that we are simply passing through. Those who have supposedly studied the historical record of this phenomena tell us that ancient people were either so stupid that they described misunderstood technology or that they just assumed it was some kind of religious experience, are totally missing the key point. The phenomena, or those who control and direct it, engineered these reactions deliberately in exactly the same way that the mysterious inventor created a frame of reference for the 1896 airship sightings in the US. The same way that the British media created a frame of reference, German invasion, for the 1909 UK scare ship sightings, and the way Mr. Tillinghast was manipulated into doing the same back in the US later the same year. Now, whenever we see an aerial manifestation of this phenomena, we label it aliens, because that's the frame of reference that we have been conditioned into. Whenever we hear of someone having been in a close encounter with the phenomena in the form of entities, we label it alien abduction, and the phenomena obliges with pseudo-medical laboratories on board a spaceship and gray aliens dressed like Dr. Kildare. Not so many years ago, the frames of reference would have been the fairy folk or angels or a meteor, the little people or a comet, God or demons. Just as in The Wizard of Oz, we need to draw back the curtain and see who's really been pulling the strings that guide these manifestations. I see no ships. As far as can be deducted from the official narrative, the religious frame of reference was the favored up until the middle of the 19th century, but then technology was rediscovered or invented and the phenomena adapted with a softly approach. Had it gone from phantom armies and angels straight to V-2 rockets and B-52s, that would have caused a sensory overload which may have been created a similar situation to that of Columbus' arrival in the East Indies when the natives couldn't see the ships in the bay because their minds couldn't process the images. Mind you, I've never really believed that story myself. World War II was the perfect cover for the phenomena. The skies were full of rockets and aircraft, so it never even occurred to most people on the ground that what they might be seeing wasn't real. Even so, the Foo Fighters made themselves known very successfully. Anything out of the ordinary could be explained as a secret weapon or experimental aircraft in testing, or blamed on the Germans. Right at the end of World War II, the Cold War scenario became a matter of urgency. Cue the Scandinavian ghost rockets of 1946. These were widely believed to be Russian in origin, and they caused near hysteria. Scandinavia was a good choice, as in any other location it could have provoked another proper war. A new frame of reference. The aliens in spaceships from another planet frame of reference literally took from 1947. The same patterns seen in all the previous flaps were evident, and there were no more and no less sightings than those of previous centuries. The only difference was the new frame of reference. The artifacts that were being left all over the countryside adapted to this new frame of reference. Take Roswell, for example. Bits of aluminum, foil, rubber, and paper sticks were found scattered across the landscape. Whether that was anything to do with the phenomena or simply a balloon is irrelevant. The press worked their gray magic on the story, and it became the most famous UFO incident of all time. which would later involve a crashed and recovered spaceship and even captured aliens. Again, we see the press in the role of catalyst to the frame of reference. Chaff. The flying saucers began exploding, as well as just breaking down like they always have done. In Ubatuba, Brazil, 1957, one left behind particles that were nothing but pure magnesium. As at the time John Keel published his book in 1970, he stated that great quantities of tiny strips of aluminium with traces of magnesium and silicon were being found all over the world. Thousands of people in Chiba, Japan, reported seeing a circular flying object eject a flood of these shreds above their city on September 7, 1956. Piles of it have been found in West Virginia, Michigan, and many other places during UFO flaps. It is frequently found laid out in neatly ordered patterns on the ground where witnesses have seen UFOs hovering. I spent a lot of time investigating these cases in 1967. These strips are almost identical to the chaff dispensed by high-flying Air Force planes to jam radar, yet they do not seem to be related to AF operations at all. The UFO chaff is often found under trees or on porches in places where it could not possibly have fallen from the sky directly. Quantities of it turned up in a burning field outside of Gastonia, North Carolina in 1966, simultaneously with low-level UFO sightings. Chemtrails. This phenomenon may have developed into what we know now as chemtrails. In 2005, my wife and I built what was described as a chembuster. It was a device based loosely on the orgone theories of Wilhelm Reich. Its origins were decidedly suspect as its design was claimed to be of extraterrestrial origin. We lacked the insight into such matters that we have nowadays. We had some very interesting experiences with it. We could see that it was working. Airplanes would come within range, and their chemtrails would disappear until they were out of range. They would keep coming back to try and fill in the gaps, but were unable to do so. We were so impressed that we filmed this activity with a professional video camera. When we came to edit the footage, we were shocked to see that what we had assumed to be aircraft were not aircraft at all. They were more like morphing orbs. The footage ended up on several websites of the period. There were other incidents as well. One day we were coming home in the car and could see how low altitude chemtrail that formed a circle with a cross inside it right over our house. Another time on a clear, calm, sunny day, a sudden typhoon erupted in the garden, picking up the chembuster and hurling it across the garden. It weighed about 20 kilos. "Excuse me, could I have my flying saucer back, please?" The breaking down scenario is another of the phenomena's favorite ploys, and it always manages to find suitably reliable witnesses, police officers, school teachers, and so on, in well-frequented locations rather than secluded spots away from prying eyes. Reports of such encounters come from all over the world, and the scripts are almost identical. The unreliability issue still seems to plague the modern technologically advanced spaceships of the interplanetary aliens, just as it did the old phantom airships of the 1890s. Random bits of machinery are still falling off of today's highly advanced UFOs just as much as they ever did, and always in places where they are most likely to be found. The mini people. Another manifestation of the phenomena that gets ignored due to its incredulity are the mini people, as John Keel describes them. In spite of hundreds of reports, they never get published. Fairy lore is common in many cultures and goes back to the earliest times, and the modern accounts are identical to the tales of fairies and gnomes from antiquity. Their appearance ranges from the traditional leprechaun to miniature astronauts, and witnesses can suffer the same physical effects ascribed to ancient encounters with fairies. such as conjunctivitis, amnesia, and paralysis, as well as those from the usual full-size UFO encounters. Many contactees admit that they have seen many people cavorting about on their furniture and even riding around in miniature flying saucers, even messing with their hair. So now you know where Hollywood stole its ideas from. Get the hell out. There was one such interesting encounter experienced by a farmer in New Jersey who found himself confronted by a 3.5-foot half gnome, half frog type creature who told him he had come in peace and didn't want any trouble, just his dog. The farmer told him to get the hell out and in no uncertain terms, and the little thing immediately ran back into his egg-shaped craft and shot off into the sky. The reason this is interesting is because it is the only account in John Keel's book where someone has actually commanded one of these entities in the way that demons must be commanded, and it worked. Empathy. There are certain types of people who seem to be more accessible to the phenomena than others. Many contactees have been told that they were selected because of their aura, although this may just be a physiological ploy to make them feel special. However, there does seem to be some factor at play which makes a person more likely to be affected by the phenomena than others, and the more frightened they become, the more the phenomena escalates. Some witnesses have related that they experience a mental or psychic connection with whatever manifestation confronts them. They go into a trance and may begin saying strange things such as, "What is your time cycle?" They will develop a blinding headache if they subsequently try to talk about the experience. Later, poltergeist activity might develop in their houses. They get strange telephone calls, and back in the day would hear weird voices coming through their CB radio. As to what the modern digital equivalent to that may be, we will come to later. They get visits from olive-complexioned men with sharp features and gray suits who sometimes claim to be Air Force officers and often assume the identity of a real person. Their clothing is always brand new, right down to the unmarked soles of their shoes. Jello. In one particular instance, such a visitor, or rather a man in black, was complaining of an upset stomach, and the contactee offered him some jelly. Jello he declined, but then the following day he returned and was again suffering from the same problem, so this time he accepted. Did you ever hear of anyone trying to drink Jello? Well, that's what he did. He acted like he had never seen any before. He picked the bowl up and tried to drink it. I had to show him how to eat it with a spoon. Lost in waves of organized belief. Not only do witnesses seem to be selected for their reliability, but also for their individual beliefs and mental attitudes. The manifestation in any information they are given is also assured to be consistent with their own beliefs. These witnesses are being used as part of some such bigger agenda, of which they are the early casualties. Many brilliant scholars and philosophers have clearly seen the truth for centuries. Libraries all over the world are filled with books detailing their findings, but their truths were lost in the waves of organized belief. The song remains the same. The old religious frame of reference that lies concealed behind our history of omens, prophecies, angels, miracles, and messages from God Himself or the Virgin Mary could also comfortably accommodate the darker manifestations that didn't fit within the former categories: demons, devils, vampires, Mothman, chupacabras. The rapture of the visionaries and prophets and the anguish of the demonically possessed were the same. They are the same as their modern contactee, abductee counterparts who perform identical functions within the latest frame of reference. Before, it was presented as a struggle between God and Satan. Now it's the Galactic Guardians versus the Reptilians. But the song remains the same. All religion is based upon messages, visions, or commandments from an entity or entities who are beyond this physical realm. Entities who appear in fiery chariots, floating on clouds or as giant fish, feathered serpents, or a disembodied voice from within a burning bush. The appropriate press agent is carefully selected, who then gets abducted into a great cloud on top of a mountain, or maybe a 100-foot workshop in Worcester, Massachusetts, taken on a quick tour of the heavens, or shown the location of some undiscovered magic golden tablets in Salt Lake City, and who then returns to inflict a new agenda upon the world. It's curious how these strange manifestations and apparitions seem to have concentrated themselves around trees and shrubbery, which are precisely the location of the sacred groves of the old world belief and a major focus of the destructive force of Judeo-Christianity. The Trickster. Native Americans tell of the Trickster, a spirit who can change form and size and walks amongst men performing vile deeds. Such legends are also found amongst many cultures, such as those in Africa, South America, and the remote Pacific Islands. Historically, there have been plenty of accounts concerning Mystery Men. Julius Caesar and Napoleon, if they were even real, were said to have had secret meetings with strange people. Thomas Jefferson has given the design for the reverse side of the Great Seal of the United States by a dark gentleman in a cloak and hood, who is these days claimed to have been Pierre Eugene du Cimetière of the cemetery, a character whose Wikipedia page seems like a total fabrication and whose drawings are childlike. Please mind the revolution. Madame de Bourrais was the last mistress of the French King Louis XV. In her memoirs, she describes frequent meetings with a strange young man who would appear out of the blue and make startling prophecies about her future. He made a point of telling her that the next time she saw him would indicate a sudden reversal of her fortunes. On April 27, 1774, she was returning to the Palace of Versailles with the king when I mechanically directed my eyes toward the iron gate leading to the garden. I felt my face drained of blood as a cry of horror escaped my lips, for leaning against the gate was that singular being. Despite a thorough search of the area, he was nowhere to be found. Soon afterwards, Madame de Bourrais was forced into exile. We are in bondage. It seems that these angels and spacemen come from a world in which each individual is part of a hive mind and has no free will. In this sense, they are like the Borg from Star Trek, but they also display the same quality as the replicators from Stargate, who take energy in one form and reconstruct it in another. Often they try to convey this to percipients with their statements. We are one. We are in bondage. Conjuration. In what we might call unprovoked manifestations, the source of energy seemed to be lines, trees, forest, fire, a human medium or contactee, and animals. In what might be termed provoked manifestations. By this I mean the deliberate conjuring of entities either by ritual summoning, Ouija boards, scrying, and seances are powered by the energy of those present, but beyond that, then blood is the clear favorite. There may be other factors involved with provoked manifestations which have to do with the collective psyche. For example, the 1909 German airship flaps in the UK and New Zealand looked as if they were a reaction to the media-generated hysteria. However, it's difficult to know because the hysteria could just as easily have been part of a more complex and sinister ritual. If this is the case, then we are talking about collusion between the phenomena and a group of humans in order to promote an agenda. Thank you for your time. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave your comments down below. This really helps to push these videos to more people that are asking questions.